Hello, and welcome to the next event in the Westbury Memorial Public Library Virtual Author Series. I'm Michelle Marcus, reference librarian and your host today. Just to let you know, actually, I don't. This is kind of repetitive, so you guys know that if you want to raise your hand to ask a question after, I don't have to go into that whole thing. Um, and in the end, I have a few housekeeping things about upcoming programs, which I'll discuss at the end. And okay, so I'm going to get started. I'm excited to speak to author Alix Rickloff. Let me share a little more about her. Critically acclaimed author of historical fiction, Alix Rickloff's family tree includes a knight who fought during the War of the Roses, his brass rubbing hangs in her dining room, cool. And a soldier who sided with Charles I during the English Civil War, hence the family's hasty immigration to America. With inspiration like that, what else could she do but start writing her own stories? She lives in Maryland in a house that's seen its own share of history, so when she's not writing, she can usually be found trying to keep it from falling down. The Girls in Navy Blue is her latest release, with a new book coming out in August. Hello, Alix. Thank you for agreeing to do this virtual author visit with the Westbury Memorial Public Library. I'm so excited to discuss your book, The Girls in Navy Blue. This was an amazing book. Could you briefly tell us a little about your book, spoiler free, of course? This way we can give audience members who haven't read the book yet a little introduction to the book.
Sure. Let me see if I can do this without spoilers. So it's a dual timeline novel set in 1918 and 1968. Basically, in 1968, Peggy, who is newly divorced and sort of reeling from her own tragedies, personal tragedies, inherits a beach house in Virginia Beach from a great aunt that she's never met before. So it's an unexpected inheritance. So she moves there and begins to fix the house up. It's kind of falling down, and she's fixing it up. And as she's fixing it up, she discovers the fact that her great aunt was actually served in the Navy during World War One. In the meantime, we have the 1918 timeline, and that is the story of Blanche and Viv and Marjorie, who are three young women who have enlisted in the Navy to serve during the First World War in Norfolk, Virginia. Blanche is a suffragette, comes from a wealthy family. She sort of joins the Navy to prove a point, prove that she's the equal of any man. Marjorie is a German American who joins up to sort of prove her patriotism in a country that's sort of growing more and more anti-German. And Viv joins up to hide from the police. So as Peggy in 1968 is learning more about sort of the mystery behind her aunt's service, we are also following the three friends who are living in the beach house during the First World War, and sort of over the last summer and fall of the war, as Viv's past sort of comes back to haunt them all. So that's sort of the story in a nutshell, without giving away too much.
Oh, that was good. I think
Oh, thank you.
spoilers. What themes were you looking to explore in this book?
Um, Well, I never go into a book knowing what themes I plan on exploring. Those sorts of things occur as the writing happens. So actually it's much easier to look back and say, oh, that's what, that those I didn't realize I was looking at those sorts of things, but definitely themes of friendship and sisterhood. Um, and just the idea of sort of loyalty to each other, as well as loyalty to the Navy, and sort of the bonds, just those bonds of sisterhood. What trumps, does anything trump those bonds of sisterhood?
Deputy owner, do you want this?
How
How
did
much
you
time
go
for the
about
pizza?
doing research for
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry about that. How did you go about doing research for this book? I believe I thought I saw in the author's notes it was been during the pandemic. Is that correct?
Yes. So I started this book during COVID, when we were all locked in our houses. So obviously the idea of traveling to somewhere to do the research was sort of out of the question. People weren't allowed to go anywhere. So luckily this Norfolk, Virginia is close to me, just a few hours away. So I'm very familiar with the area, and I'm familiar with the Chesapeake Bay region, obviously. So it sort of made it an obvious choice to set the book. It allowed me to do the research, or at least to know my setting without having to travel there. I was familiar enough that I could place myself in that space. I was also, I mean, thank heaven, so much is online anymore. So there was plenty of documentation online that I could get through public access. And then I will give a shout out to librarians everywhere. I had a fabulous local research librarian. Well, they're all wonderful. They've gotten very used to me coming in with crazy questions and asking for weird books. And they don't even bat an eye anymore. They just kind of order them through interlibrary loan, and here they are. So there were a couple books. So I was constantly calling them or ordering online. And I found a source. One story, I found a source that was a research book down at Virginia Commonwealth University. And it was a history of Norfolk during World War I, which sounded exactly like what I wanted. It had all sorts of the details that could really bring the book alive on my head. So I was desperate to get my hands on it. And Virginia Commonwealth was like, no, we're not going to send it to, we don't want to send this out of state, So my interlibrary loan request was denied. So I went to my librarian at my local library and I said, oh, they turned me down. And she said, don't worry, leave it with me. And about 2 or 3 days later, she emailed me back and she said, they're sending the book up. So I don't know what arms she twisted or threats she made, but she was fabulous. So that she and everyone there made it a lot easier to do all that research while I was shut in my house. Also, if you've read the book, you know that there's a large section of it that takes place during the Spanish flu epidemic. Since we were all going through COVID, that also made it a bit easier to put myself in my characters' bodies or, minds, because that's what, we were all going through it. We were living the same thing they were living, the masking and the closures of schools and, theaters and, all of that stuff that was happening to them was happening to us. So it was very easy to sort of describe it because all I had to do was, turn on the news or walk outside. And we were all going through it together.
And also, what was the origin of how to get the idea for this book?
Sure. Well, actually, I happened to be reading an article. I don't remember where. It was online. I was reading an article and I came across a mention of Joy Bright Hancock. She was an amazing woman. She worked for the Bureau of Aeronautics in the 20s and the 30s. She joined the Waves in 1942 as a lieutenant and rose through the ranks and ended up leading the Waves by the end of the war and stayed on and actually helped lead the transition of women into the regular Navy before she finally retired in 1953. And actually, I found out after the book was published that there is an annual award given out by the Navy, the Joy Bright Hancock Award, to a Navy personnel, someone in the Navy who has furthered the role of women in in the Navy. So anyway, I stumbled across this article about her, and it said that she'd gotten her start as a yeomanette in 1917. And I had never heard that term before. I didn't know anything. I'd never heard of yeomanettes before. I never realized that women served in the Navy in World War I. I knew about the waves in World War II, but I had no idea that this had happened, this little kind of pocket of history that had sort of been forgotten. So I immediately dove down the rabbit research hole and was digging up anything I could find on yeomanettes, any articles or books or anything. And that inspired the story. Immediately I thought, oh, these women deserve to have their service remembered. So from there, that was how the story grew.
Very good. How do you relate to the three main characters, Blanche, Viv, and Marjorie?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes, how do you relate to the three main characters, Blanche, Viv, and Marjorie? And also, can you share more about your experience writing these characters?
Oh, goodness. Sure. Well, they were three. I wanted to bring in three very different sort of backgrounds, three very different women who were kind of coming into the service from different walks of life. I definitely wanted to explore the anti-German sentiment that was sweeping the nation during the First World War. It was much more prevalent in the Midwest, where there were where there were a lot more German settlers that had emigrated. That was where so many of them settled. But it was certainly, not isolated there. I mean, it was all over the country that these things were happening and the anti-German sentiment was happening. So I wanted to have a character who was kind of grappling with those issues, grappling with the idea of sort of not torn between countries, but definitely grappling with, having to prove herself to a country that might not necessarily be as friendly as she thought it was to her and her family. And then, of course, I couldn't get away from the suffragette movement that was going on at the time. It was such a big part of what was happening in the country for women. So I wanted to bring in that as well. And so the character of Blanche just seemed like the perfect way to do that. I mean, the whole suffragette movement was just so torn when the war started out. Do we join up? Do we put aside our differences, because we're all fighting together? Or is this a chance to really push our agenda? Because here we are, we're fighting for the freedom of these people in another country, and yet here we are, and we don't have the rights that we're fighting, we're hoping to have this other country will have. So that was another way to explore. So Blanche was definitely a way to explore that. And then, of course, Viv's character, she's almost an observer of a lot of the story. I mean, her story is the engine, I guess, that runs the book, but she very much is kind of on the outside. She's sort of the outsider watching what's happening. Unfortunately, for everyone in the book, that doesn't stay. She doesn't stay that way, but she was a way to sort of see what was going on without actually being in the Blanche and Marjorie POVs. So that was how I related. That's why I brought each of those characters in as characters in the book. And as I write characters, I know a lot of authors who sit down and do all sorts of work beforehand with their characters and really know their characters inside out when they start the book. Unfortunately, I'm more of I call it a plotzer. I don't write by the seat of my pants, and I don't outline everything, but I sort of, as I go along, I know just enough to keep going. So a lot of my characters are built as I'm writing. So things occur to me, or my characters may have conversations that I had absolutely no idea they were going to have, which takes the story in a different direction. Or they may bring up things and I'm like, huh, I had no idea that's what she thought about that. Let's explore that a little bit. Um, so that's, again, the character sort of evolved as the story went.
Okay, so related to that, as you were saying that you were plots are when you write, did you know the ending for the book before you started, or did it come to you as you wrote the book?
Um, I would say I knew I had a general idea of how it was going to end, but not the specifics. So I kind of, and that's that's the best I could do. I did write a synopsis that I did hand in to my editor so she could kind of see where I was going. It's not written in stone though, so things can change, and and things usually change as I'm going along. But yeah, I did know how it was going to end. I just wasn't quite sure how we were going to get there.
How did you decide to write in the genre of historical fiction?
Sure. Well, I've always been I'm a history major. That was what I majored in college. I grew up in a family of history nerds. We can argue, you get us together and we can argue the most obscure, strange factoids that you could ever, and you wonder. My husband just laughs when he sees my brothers and I all together. He's like, you guys talk about the strangest things. But so history's always been something I've been interested in. Um, and so historical fiction is just one of those things that I was able to, when I had the opportunity. I was at a crossroads in my career. I was between contracts, and my agent said, well, what do you want to write about right now? And so I had an idea. And so I was kind of like, okay, if you're going to let me run with this, then that's, I'm going to jump into the historical fiction. I'm going to write what I've been wanting to write all along. And that's what I did with my first book. And that's just been, it's been so much fun. I love it. I love finding those sort of nuggets in history that haven't been kind of then teased out. I can read a headline and I'm immediately kind of what ifing, oh, that sounds interesting, or finding those little corners of history, like the Yeomanettes, um, that have kind of been forgotten, and bringing them back to life.
Okay, can you share more about your background before you were a published writer and how you decided to become one?
Sure. So I've always written. It's just something I've always done since, gosh, probably third or fourth grade. I still have some of the things, the little stories I wrote on notebook paper, all stapled together and illustrated. I have them in a box in my attic. So I was always writing stories. It was something that I loved to do all the way up through school. I just never thought I would ever do anything with it. It was just sort of a hobby. It was just sort of, something I did for fun. Um, but the stories got longer, and soon I was writing novels. But again, I was just doing it for myself. I would write something and I would stick it in a drawer, or it would just sort of languish on my hard drive. It was just sort of something I did as a way to let off steam, just like anybody, knitting, or I don't know, photography, or it was just my hobby. So finally, after about the third or fourth, my husband finally said, and by this time I had little kids. He said, if you're going to keep doing this, why don't you just see if you could, if it's something you might actually be able to do, can you pursue it? And so I did. I joined RWA, which is the Romance Writers of America, in 2003. And from there, I was able to find an agent, um, and um, and was soon published in romance, and then made the move to historical fiction about 2016 was when my first historical fiction novel came out. Um, So yeah, so that's was my kind of, I was very lucky. I was very fortunate in my path, uh, but I've loved every minute of it.
That's great. Did you write a historical romance when you were writing romance?
I did.
I figured because he likes history. I figured you romance. Like any particular time period that you know?
When I was writing historical romance, they were mostly set during the Regency era. Obviously, that's sort of the bulk of historical romance is set during the Regency. But mine were a twist. So I was historical and I had a paranormal element. So I was throwing everything in there.
That sounds really
I had
interesting.
history, I had fantasy, I had the whole
I'll
thing.
have it. Our audience and I love to hear book recommendations. I was just wondering if you could share any that you have.
Book recommendation. Let's see. What have I just been reading? Gosh, I've been reading arcs recently, so I could give you book recommendations of things that haven't come out yet.
That's fine.
Let's see. I am a huge mystery reader. I love a good mystery, so I have been kind of catching up on my Anne Cleeves. I have been going through, I had been picking sort of ones every now and then, but I finally I'm a big believer in starting at one and working my way through. So I have been binging Anne Cleeves, her Vera Stanhope mysteries recently, because they're so good. And I never know who's going to do it before the end. So that, and I love watching Brenda Blevin on BritBox doing Vera. So so that's a good recommend. So those are good. If you love mysteries, I would highly recommend anything by Anne Cleeves. But recently I have been reading, I just finished an arc that I'm trying to remember when it comes out though. For Christine Wells's The Paris Gown. I want to say it comes out in July, but I could be wrong about that. But you'll have to look it up. I'm sure it's on her website or on Amazon or anyone. It will give you a date. And she's fantastic. But that's set in Paris in the 50s and involves Dior. And and so if you like, sort of French cafes and couture fashion and Paris in the 50s, it was a lovely read. So highly recommend.
Sounds like fun. Are there any others or?
Oh my goodness. Um trying to go back through my reading list of what I've been reading lately. That's terrible. You put me on the spot. Now my mind has gone completely blank on the books I've read in the last few weeks. Let's see. Those are probably it. If any others occur to me though, as we're going along, I just will blurt them out in the middle of whatever we're doing.
Okay, so we'll open up the questions soon, but I just have one last question. Well, actually two, but one I could ask at the very end. Um, I see you have a book coming out in August, The Last Light in Oslo. Can you please share a little more about that, please?
Sure, I can be happy to. Oh, I even actually had the arc with me because I was like, oh, maybe they'll talk about it. So this is The Last Light over Oslo, and it comes out on August 6th. And this is a story based or inspired by Daisy Harriman. So she was the U.S. minister, the ambassador, really is what she was, to Norway in 1940. She was an amazing woman. She was born into, she was, huge wealth. So she went to school with, Anne Morgan, and she was hanging out with Vanderbilts and Morgans and all the movers and shakers. She was a socialite in New York in the 1880s and 1890s, sort of the Gilded Age. She was right in the middle of it. And then she was a suffragette. She ended up in politics. She worked for the International Labor Commission with President Wilson. So she was a very progressive. She was involved. She helped found the Colony Club in New York City, which was the first social club for women. But anyway, she ended up, so in 1940 or in 1937, FDR gave her the ambassadorship to Norway in 1940. So that's the background to who she was. But anyway, the book starts in 1940 and is based on the her exploits during the unexpected invasion of Norway by the Germans. She is sort of caught up in that invasion as she's trying to follow the royal family and keep tabs on them for the US government. And she ends up helping the Crown Princess Martha and her family escape and brings them to America in the summer of 1940. So it's sort of about that adventure. And she was 70 when all this was happening, and she was dodging bombs and in her car trying to follow the Norwegian government. So she was an amazing, amazing lady.
That sounds really, really good. Yeah, I look forward to reading that. So now I will open up the questions I see. We have one from Maria and then one of Marilyn in the chat. So I will start with Maria and then I will go to Marilyn. If anyone else has any questions, please feel free either put them in the chat or raise your hand and ask the question. Okay, so go.
Hi.
Mhm.
How you doing? Have you met other historical authors? Like I know Stephanie Dreyer, she just wrote Frances Perkins, and I'm reading Margaret Fuller right now with Alison Pataki, Martha Hall Kelly with Lilac Girls, and all those other. Who have you met from the historical fiction authors? Because I've met Kristen Hamel, and I know Friends of Fiction. If you met any of those authors, and now that we can travel, where have you been abroad? Have you visited England or Germany, or what places have you visited?
Sure. So yes, I do know other historical fiction authors. I have not met Alison Pataki or Kristen Harmel, but I do know Stephanie Dray. Actually, Stephanie and I are agent sisters. So she and I share an agent. So we're quite, we are very friendly. There's a whole group of us that sort of we have a group that we, exchange news, we chat, and mostly online because we're all over the world. But we do, so we are all very friendly online, and we get together for retreats and conferences and thing. And she's lovely, and I can't wait. That is one of the books, the one about Frances Perkins, is on my
Hey, I loved it.
list.
You will love it. Yes,
Is it? Yeah,
it's really good.
Is it? Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. I mean, everything she writes is fantastic.
That's true. I read 4 of her books. My Dear Hamilton and First Daughter and Chateau Lafayette. Those, and yeah, she's awesome. And so is Martha Hall Kelly. I read all of her series. I'm going to be reading. I love the way you do descriptive words. I felt like you placed me there when I was reading yours. I was like, I like the way you word things, that they tie into each other, and I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And yes, I have, now that COVID is over, I have been able to do some more traveling. So for this book, for The Last Light Over Oslo, I did travel to Norway and Sweden while I was writing it. So it's been it's been over a year now, unfortunately. Oh, it was lovely. So yes, I did get to go and sort of trace her travels. And actually, I was, I took pictures of, it's funny because I was in Oslo and I was taking pictures of 28 Noblesgate, which was her, where she was living at the time, and part of the book takes place there. The early chapters take place there. And it's still the ambassador's residence in Norway. So you can't get in, but I was snapping pictures through the fence and everything. Well, then I was in Stockholm, and I was at the American ambassador's residence because she spent time there when she was, dealing with the U.S. ambassador Sterling, who was the ambassador to Sweden at the time. So I was snapping pictures of it, and I'm thinking, somebody's going to catch me on a camera. It's going to say, this woman was just in Oslo taking pictures, and now here she is in Stockholm taking pictures. And I was waiting for security guards to come like bum rush me out the gate and be like, steal my phone and be like, what are you doing here? What? I'm just an author. I'm sorry.
So one more question. I know you mentioned the Moody Blues, Nights in White Satin. That's one of my favorite songs. How does an author know what information to put in, like in regards to music, books, like what titles to put in? I don't know if you've seen Moody Blues. I saw them in concert.
Oh,
But
wonderful.
yeah, is there a reason why? How do you choose what to put in your books? What songs?
Sometimes it's simply a matter of, trying to set the scene, what was popular, what was being played on the radio in 1968, what might, sometimes it's a song that goes with the scene. So I think in the beginning of the book, she hears someone on the beach, the transistor radio playing Happy Together. And she thinks about it. So that sort of tied in with the scene itself. So that's really how I chose kind of, and sometimes I, put in it's a nod to something that I like, or a song that I especially like, or a book that's a favorite of mine. I have to say, I do slip a little of those in there.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed this. I'm going to be reading your other two. I think you have two other historical ones, 2016 and
Yes.
2017, the London ones. Yeah, I will be picking those up. Added to I have a pile of them. And I already requested your Oslo book, the
Oh, well, thank you. Wonderful. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
So good.
I'll let others go. Their turn. Thank you.
So I was just going to go back to Marilyn's question in the chat, because we were talking about books that you read recently. So she was asking if you read while you're writing at the same time.
I do read while I'm writing, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be reading at all, because I'm always writing. I'm either writing or editing or revising. So yes, I do. But again, it depends on what I tend to move around. I'll read anything. So I don't have necessarily one genre that I'm constantly reading. Historical fiction's fun, but sometimes when I'm really deep in the weeds in my own books, like I said, mysteries are just almost like a palate cleanser. They're kind of like, they're fun, they're easy a lot of the times. They're just kind of ways that I can kind of not be thinking, not be in that historical kind of fiction, not be so into my head. So those are fun. But yes, I do read all the time. I'm constantly got a book. If not more than one. Got my upstairs book, my downstairs book, my in my purse book.
Okay, so next we'll go to Sharon. See you again for your question or comment.
Yes, thank you. This is one of the first times I haven't finished a book before the author talk, but I did not. I'm about halfway through, so I, for once, did appreciate the non-spoiler thing. But one thing I'm going to ask a question, which I don't think is a spoiler because it happens at the very beginning, is like a historical question. I was surprised right away with that they had to find their uniforms. So is that something you actually researched, and that was actually the case where they weren't given what to, I was surprised at that right away.
Yeah, so they were given an allowance to purchase the uniforms, but no, they did not have uniforms, because actually at the time it happened so quickly that to begin with, there wasn't even a regulation uniform. I mean, they didn't, so there were some women were doing one thing, some women were doing another thing. I mean, they were kind of all over the place. It took them a while before the Navy actually came out and said, okay, this is what you need to be wearing. So for a long time, they were kind of just left to their own devices in terms of what uniforms, what they needed. But yes, were in charge of finding their own stuff and making it their own kind of, the like I said, when Blanche, I think, is fixing it so that the skirt's a little shorter and that fits a little better. That was something that a lot of them had to do.
Yeah, and she also gave her the hint of where to go and stuff like that, which, I mean, how would you even know that? But although I guess they would tell you that, but,
Yeah, and
you know,
actually that came from, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but that was actually the place where she told him to go was actually came out of a newspaper from Norfolk at the time. So that was actually, and the ad was, come here for your uniforms kind of thing. So that's why I was able to stick that in. I was like, oh, perfect.
Yeah. No, I really, and I appreciated I liked what I'm reading so far, and I appreciated the details. So I don't remember who it was. Maybe it was Maria that, it was almost like we're sort of there. It's very good.
Oh.
The other thing is I've always wanted, like, I mean, if I were to find the house by the beach, just that feeling of, in both times, what that refuge sort of felt like, even if it was falling down. So that spoke to me as well. But I appreciated you doing the 50-year difference. And I think that's also because I've reached an age where, like 1918, I mean, sounds so long ago, but 50 years ago, that sounded so long ago to me, like it was just like ancient history. But in reality, the fact that, 50 years is a long time, but there are people who would then still be alive, that could then interact again in modern, in whatever that was happening. And also picking, you had to pick, 1918 because it's what was going on, for the Yeomanettes. And again, I had never heard of them, so I love learning that type of stuff. But 68 was such a amazing time in the U.S. So I just, I'm really, really enjoying it. And yeah, the Spanish flu, which I had not heard much of until we were going through, the beginnings of COVID. So it's just remarkable. And one more thing is that when you spoke of the themes, I just assumed that those themes are in an author's head and they're trying to get it through rather than you allowing this organic thing to happen, that you may have some ideas and you allow that to go and look back again. But
well, again, I can only speak as to how I do it. So there may be plenty of authors that go into a book knowing ahead of time what themes that they want to explore. That's just not my process. I've tried that and it just shuts me down. I can't get any further. So I've just found that that it just works for me the other way around.
But thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course.
I have not read your books, and the new one sounds great.
Oh, well, thank you.
Okay, first I want to go to Susie's question in the chat. She asked, who was your favorite character to write in this book?
Oh, my favorite character to write. Oh gosh, that's tough. I mean, Blanche is my obvious choice because I mean, I got to sort of channel my inner, I don't know, snarkiness or something like that. She's kind of has that way about her. Maybe she's the way I wish I was, in a perfect world, kind of the way I want to wish I could portray myself, because she just is sort of a take no prisoners kind of a character. But I think I liked Suzanne was a fun character to write. And she's not on there I mean, she's not in the book very much. She's sort of a side character. But she was just, I don't know, she was the kind of best friend that you just wish you had, just down the street. So I liked playing with, I liked being in her head and being able to have her as a character.
That was really good. All right, so Marilyn, I'll go to you next for your question.
Well, what house did you use? You had to You had to describe that house. I'm not very far in. I'm only like about 30% in. I apologize for not
That's okay.
getting farther. I'm enjoying the book, and you did describe the house, and I was like going, does she live in this house, or does she have a relative that lives in this house?
I do not. And I don't think the house is, I mean, it's not, I did not describe a house that I actually found there. So I enjoyed playing. I just typed in kind of like beach houses in floor plans for beach houses and architects' drawings of beach houses. And then, so then I got to find my favorite. And I just found the one that looked the way I thought it ought to look. And then,
Oh, that's the joys of the internet, right? And
exactly.
then this pertains to your newest book, which I'll be real excited to read. Did you see the PBS series Atlantic Crossing?
I did. Actually, that was the inspiration for the book. So I watched that. I did watch that PBS series. I loved it. But the thing was, in like the very first episode, there's a conversation between the princess and this woman. And I was like, who is this woman? Who is she? And again, I Googled it, like who, who is this woman she's talking to? And I'd never heard of Daisy Harriman. So immediately, again, I was like, oh, I perked right up. So that was, that one little snippet of a scene sent me all over the place and ended up in a book. So you never know where you're going to find those little things that set you off.
And you didn't discuss her with Stephanie Dre, because I'm thinking Stephanie Dre's writing about Francis Perkins and Roosevelt, and I'm thinking, well, that may have set Roosevelt up to make other women and put other women into his administration because
I wouldn't be surprised. And like I said, I haven't read Stephanie's book, but he was certainly ahead of his time in allowing women to sort of step forward and in a way that they weren't allowed to before in those.
Well, that social circle and the education that many of those women were able to receive, and I think he was aware, he was coming in contact with that more frequently perhaps than other people. Okay, well, I'm enjoying.
And honestly, and I read this in my research for Last Light Over Oslo, when I believe, I think in a large part too, Daisy Harriman was only the second woman to be chosen as a U.S. ambassador, basically. So he posted her in 1937. At the time, I don't think he had any idea that she was going to end up on the front line of this sort of world events. Norway was this sort of little backwater country. Nobody, it was just sort of out there. It was neutral. It was little, nothing really happened there. So it was a pretty safe spot for him to put somebody. And then, obviously all of a sudden, here comes the war, and she's kind of thrust into a role that no one could have foreseen. So it was just lucky that she was who she was, and she was able to rise to the occasion.
Well, I'm looking forward to, I have some of your other books. I haven't read them. I'm sorry to say, but I'm looking forward to reading them, and I'm enjoying this book a lot. Thank you for being with us today.
Does anyone else have any other questions? I was also things I was thinking about when I was reading the book. I knew like certain groups, like when we were at war with certain groups, that there was discrimination against them. But I had to know, like we always hear about like the Japanese, and they were put like in camps, and like I didn't know, like I didn't know about the Germans, and recently just heard about the Italians that they were put in camps too. So did you know anything about that, and that came across in your research as well when you were writing?
Yeah, it did come across in my research. I did a lot of research on the sort of anti-German sentiment that was happening in the country, mostly because as I was kind of going through the book, there were certain plot points that sort of I thought might happen one way, but then didn't happen. So I did a lot of research that didn't necessarily end up in the book. But yes, so there was a lot of discrimination. The German American community in America in that time was robust. It was thriving. There were German American newspapers, and there were German and schools that were they were German American schools and German American churches, and it was just they were a very large immigrant population that were doing very well. So when the war came, they did actually round up, not in the way that they did the Japanese in the Second World War, but they did round up those who had emigrated here that might not be citizens. They were keeping tabs on them. They had camps in some of the southern states where they were putting these mostly men who, may not have had U.S. citizenship, but were living in the country. And some were, very high ranking men. They were, conductors of symphonies and writers, and, it wasn't just sort of, the sort of blue collar workers or people they weren't quite sure about. And then there were a lot of these groups that formed at the same time. There was the National Security League and the American Defense Society, and these sort of patriot groups that were going around sort of testing people's patriotism, and which was just a way to sort of bully the German Americans into, giving, sometimes it was, maybe that might be a business owner who was jealous of another business owner, and they might, they were starting to inform on each other. I mean, there was even a lynching in I want to say Missouri, but I'm not sure. I could be wrong about that, where they actually took where they actually he was accused of something, and they strung him up for it. So it was a violent kind of antsy time for a lot of German Americans. They closed down newspapers, they closed down churches, they closed down schools. So yeah, it's not something that's talked about a lot. You get sort of the funny stories about, I think I even put those in the book about, they changed the name of hamburgers, and they changed the name of sauerkraut and dachshunds, and they give them, they sort of Americanize things. And those are kind of funny stories, but you don't hear the sort of darker side of what was going on.
Did I see another question? Did someone write another question in the chat, or was I mistaken? No? Because one is or something. Okay, anyhow.
I took it out because I don't know if it was a spoiler, so I didn't have I didn't know if maybe I finished the book, but I know everyone else hasn't, so I took it out. I don't know if anyone read it, but sorry. But I like that. So I can't. I don't. It's hard to do it without a spoiler. Thank you.
Okay, so I was gonna say, what's the best way, Alex, to keep in touch with you and find out later about tour dates or more information about your book release in August, so as it gets closer to that date?
Yeah, of course. I'm always happy to keep the conversation going. You can follow me on Facebook or Instagram or BookBub if you're over there. And that's always a good place to get, announcements on, new book news and things like that. You can also sign up for my newsletter. If you go to my website at alixrickloff.com, there's a little button you push and you put in your email address. I don't send a ton. I try to do one a quarter because I don't want to overload people with stuff. I know my inbox gets full And I don't want people going, oh Lord, here she comes again. So but I do try to put book news in there, and I tend to do giveaways and things like that for my newsletter subscribers. So that's a good way to keep in touch if you want to find out what's happening. So those are the best ways to get a hold, or you can always, and just drop me an email. Again, through my website, you can just, that's another good way to reach me. So.
Okay, so I want to say thank you, Alex, so much for doing the virtual author visit with Westbury Library. We all enjoyed talking with you. Please join us next month when we speak to Ashton Lattimore, author of All That We Were Promised. And I apologize that this is just like the next week. It's just the way it was scheduled. It's next Thursday, May 2nd at 7 p.m. And you can register on the website. And I apologize. And as you know, you don't have to read the book before because there's no spoilers. So you can still come if you're Westbury Library patron. We will have copies of the book shortly if you want to get started before the program. So thank you again, Alex, and good night to all our attendees.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Thank you,
Thank
Michelle.
you.
Thank you so much, guys, for having me, and I'm so happy you enjoyed the book. This was a lot of
Thank you.
fun.
Thank you.
Loved it.
Bye.
Take
Good
care.
night.
Thank you.
Bye.